A single line of code was about to cost a billionaire CEO $500 million. His entire team of top engineers was useless. When his new housemaid, the one he never even bothered to look at, walked over to his desk. The same fingers that were wiping down surfaces moments ago now began to fly across the keyboard. And before I tell you exactly what he saw when he walked back in, take a quick second and tell me, what's the weather like where you're listening from? Like and drop a comment below. I'm genuinely curious. Now, are you ready? It all started like this. The clock on the wall ticked past 2 in the morning. From the penthouse perched high above the glittering skyline of New York, the city lights blurred into a distant hum, like stars too far to touch. A sharp voice echoed through the space. Run it again. That's Andrew Evans. He paced slowly, his custom-tailored suit hanging a bit looser than usual, the faint scent of sandalwood cologne clinging to him like a second skin. The video call on his massive screen flickered with the faces of his top engineers, their expressions a mix of exhaustion and deference. This glitch isn't just a bug, it's a goddamn torpedo aimed at our $500 million deal. Fix it. Or explain to the board why we're handing the market to the competition. One engineer, a young guy with Ivy League credentials Andrew had personally vetted, stammered through a proposed solution. Sir, if we reroute the algorithm through a secondary server. Andrew cut him off with a sharp wave. That's amateur hour. You're thinking small, like this is some startup hackathon. I've seen better ideas from interns. He leaned forward, his mind racing. Inside, a familiar storm brewed. Why couldn't they see it? These were the best minds money could buy, yet here he was, carrying the weight alone. Again. It had always been this way. Ever since his father shipped him off to boarding school at 12, preaching self-reliance like a gospel. Stand on your own, son. Degrees and deals are what matter. Andrew had learned that lesson well. People were assets, evaluated by resumes and results. Emotions? Those were liabilities, easily bought off or ignored. He rubbed his temples, feeling the pulse of fatigue. He was the CEO of Evans Tech, a billionaire who had built an empire from code and cunning. But tonight, that empire teetered on the edge of collapse. The penthouse was a fortress of luxury, marble floors cool under his feet, modern art on the walls that cost more than most people's homes, but it felt empty, a hollow echo chamber. No family photos, no lingering traces of anyone else's life, just him, the glow of screens, and the relentless drive to control everything. Money fixed problems, it always had, but tonight, as the code refused to bend, a quiet doubt crept in. What if some things couldn't be coded or cashed out? In the background, a soft rustle caught his ear for a split second. The new housekeeper, Natalie something or other, was moving quietly through the living room, dusting surfaces with efficient, unobtrusive motions. She was young, maybe mid-20s, with dark hair tied back and a uniform that blended into the shadows. Andrew barely registered her, just another service in his well-oiled machine. Hired through an agency, vetted for discretion. She didn't matter. She was invisible, like the air conditioning that hummed faintly overhead. "All right," he said to the team, his tone final. "Implement the patch I suggested earlier, and don't call back unless it's fixed." He ended the call with a click, the screen going dark. Silence settled, heavy and oppressive. Andrew stared out at the city, his mind churning through lines of code like a mental debugger. He could fix this. He had to. No one else understood the stakes, the way one error could unravel years of work. Deep down, though, in that rare, unguarded moment, he felt the void. Success had its price. Nights like this, alone, with the storm raging inside. Was this what winning looked like? A throne in an empty kingdom? He turned away from the window, grabbing his laptop from the desk. The code stared back, defiant. Fine, he'd handle it himself. That's what he did best. Stand alone, unbreakable. Or so he told himself. Andrew stepped away from the desk, his shoulders slumping under the weight of the night. The code on the screen mocked him, a tangled mess of logic that refused to unravel. He needed air, just a moment to clear his head. Pushing open the glass door to the balcony, he leaned against the railing, the cool night breeze cutting through the haze of his thoughts. Below, the city pulsed with life, cars weaving like fireflies, distant sirens a reminder that the world didn't stop for anyone, not even a billionaire with a crisis. He closed his eyes, breathing deep, trying to push back the exhaustion that clawed at him. For a second, he wondered if this was all there was, endless battles in boardrooms and late-night fixes, with no one to share the victory or the defeat. Inside, the penthouse fell quiet, save for the soft whir of the laptop fan. Natalie Fraser moved methodically through her tasks, wiping down the sleek surfaces with a cloth that smelled faintly of lemon polish. At 24, she was used to blending into the background, her plain uniform and tied-back hair making her just another fixture in this opulent space. But beneath that unassuming exterior burned a sharp mind, honed in the quiet corners of public libraries and free online courses. Growing up in an orphanage had taught her resilience, the kind that came from scraping by, from putting dreams on hold to keep the lights on at the place that had raised her. She'd dropped out of her computer science program 2 years in, when funding for the home dried up. Now this job paid the bills, but it couldn't extinguish the fire inside her, the pull toward problems that begged to be solved. As she approached the desk to dust, her eyes flicked to the open laptop. Lines of code scrolled across the screen, elegant in their complexity, but flawed. She could see it instantly, like a puzzle with a missing piece screaming for attention. Her heart quickened. It was beautiful, this algorithm. A digital symphony that should hum perfectly, but instead stuttered on a logic loop. She shouldn't look closer. This wasn't her place. She was here to clean, not meddle. But the coder in her stirred, that insatiable urge to fix what was broken. What harm could a glance do? She hesitated, fingers tightening on the cloth. Memories flashed, of late nights poring over borrowed books, the thrill of her first successful program running flawlessly. This was just like that, a challenge dangling in front of her. She couldn't ignore it any more than she could stop breathing. Glancing toward the balcony door, she saw Andrew's silhouette against the night sky, still turned away. Her pulse raced as she set the cloth down and slid into the chair. Her fingers hovered over the keys, then danced across them with quiet precision. There. The error was in the recursive function, a subtle overflow that cascaded through the system. She tweaked a few lines, rerouting the data flow with an efficient elegance that came from years of self-taught ingenuity. It took minutes, but when she hit save, a quiet satisfaction bloomed in her chest. She stood quickly, stepping back as if nothing had happened, ready to resume her dusting. The balcony door slid open, and Andrew strode back in, his mind already gearing up to tackle the code again. But he froze mid-step, eyes locking on the scene. The housekeeper at his desk, the laptop screen now showing a clean compile. Rage surged through him like a current. "What the hell do you think you're doing?" he growled, crossing the room in 3 strides. This was sabotage, had to be. Who was she to touch his work, his world? Natalie spun around, her face paling, but she didn't cower. Her hands trembled slightly, but her voice held steady, laced with that unyielding self-respect she'd fought to keep. "I saw the error. It was a logic flaw in the recursion. I fixed it." Simple words, no excuses, just the truth. Before he could retort, his phone buzzed sharply. The lead engineer. Andrew snatched it up, his glare still pinned on her. "What?" he snapped. The voice on the other end was breathless. "Sir, the system's up. It's running perfectly. Whatever you did, it's a miracle." Andrew lowered the phone slowly, the anger draining from his face. replaced by a stunned disbelief. He stared at Natalie, really seeing her for the first time. Not as a shadow, but as someone who had just pulled off what his elite team couldn't. Who was this woman, and how had she cracked what eluded him? A spark of curiosity ignited amid the shock, pulling him toward questions he wasn't ready to ask. The morning after the code miracle, Andrew sat in his home office, the sun slicing through the blinds like a reminder that the world kept turning. He hadn't slept much, replaying the night in his head. The way Natalie's fingers had flown over the keys, fixing what his team couldn't. Firing her crossed his mind, but something held him back. Curiosity, maybe, or the nagging sense that she was a puzzle he needed to solve. By the time she arrived for her shift, he'd made up his mind. He called her in, gesturing to the chair across from his desk. "Sit," he said, his voice carrying that CEO authority he'd perfected over years of board meetings. Natalie paused in the doorway, her uniform neat as always, but her eyes met his without flinching. She sat, hands folded in her lap, waiting. "You're not fired," Andrew started, leaning back in his leather chair. "But you're not just cleaning anymore. 2 hours a day, you'll consult on this project. Tell me how you spotted that bug. In return, you keep your job, and I'll pay you double." She tilted her head slightly, considering. It wasn't a question, it was a deal, the kind he was used to sealing with handshakes and signatures. She did this cleaning job because the pay was much higher than usual. All for the smooth running of the orphanage, she had to work more than usual. So 2 hours, in exchange for double the salary, there was no reason for her to refuse. The children there needed her, needed this money. So she nodded once. "Fine. But only if it's actual consulting, not just you quizzing me like some lab rat." And just like that, the sessions began. The first one that afternoon, in the quiet of the penthouse library, surrounded by shelves of leather-bound books he'd barely cracked. Andrew pulled up the code base on a shared screen, pointing to a section. "Explain why your fix worked better than rerouting through the cloud." "My engineers have PhDs from MIT. They swear by distributed systems." Natalie leaned forward, her gaze steady on the lines. "Because it's overkill. You're throwing resources at a problem that logic can solve cleaner. Look here. The overflow wasn't hardware. It was in the loop condition. Simple math error, compounded. Fancy degrees don't catch everything if you're not looking close." He countered quickly, citing a Harvard Business Review article on scalable architecture, his words laced with the confidence of someone who'd built a fortune on it. But she dismantled it point by point, her responses sharp, grounded in practical fixes rather than theory. By the end, he'd conceded, grudgingly. "All right, point taken," he muttered, a flicker of irritation in his chest. Who was she to school him? The next day, it happened again. Over coffee in the kitchen, her dusting forgotten for the moment, he challenged her on a new module. "This integration needs elite talent. You think a dropout could handle it?" He hadn't meant it as a jab, but it came out that way, his old habit surfacing. She didn't bristle, just smiled faintly. "Talent isn't a diploma. It's seeing the pattern others miss. Your code's solid, but it's rigid, like building a fortress when a smart gate would do." He lost that round too, his arguments crumbling under her logic. Frustration built, but underneath it something shifted. For the first time, he wasn't debating underlings who nodded along. She pushed back, unafraid, her words cutting through his armor without malice. That evening, alone with his thoughts, Andrew paced the penthouse. Why did her opinions linger? He'd always valued credentials. His own MBA from Wharton, the pedigrees of his hires. But Natalie? No fancy resume, yet she saw things he didn't. It unnerved him. this woman who didn't bow to his wealth or status. She treated him like an equal, not a king. By the third session, in the dim light of the study, the air crackled with a new energy. He tossed out a hypothetical. If we scale this to enterprise level, what's the weak link? She fired back, her explanation weaving in real-world examples from open-source projects she'd tinkered with. He leaned in closer, genuinely engaged, his usual detachment cracking. When she proved him wrong again, politely but firmly, a reluctant smile tugged at his lips. "You're infuriating, you know that?" She shrugged. Or just right. As the days blurred, Andrew found himself looking forward to those 2 hours. They weren't just about code anymore. Snippets of conversation slipped in. Her offhand mention of debugging on a library computer, his rare admission of a past failure. Deep down, doubts crept in about his worldview. Was success really just money and titles? Natalie challenged that without trying, her quiet strength a mirror to his isolation. For the first time, he wondered if control was all he needed, or if letting someone in might be the real fix. The conference room at Evans Tech headquarters buzzed with the low hum of anticipation, floor-to-ceiling windows framing the midday skyline like a power statement. Andrew adjusted his tie, feeling the familiar surge of confidence as he prepared for the meeting with Luca George. At 50-something, Luca was the CEO of Apex Solutions, their biggest client, a man whose handshake could seal fortunes or shatter them. Andrew had dealt with his type before, old-school elite, the kind who measured worth by alma maters and club memberships. But today, with the project humming smoothly thanks to Natalie's tweaks, Andrew felt on solid ground. Luca entered with his entourage, a silver fox in a bespoke suit, his smile all teeth and no warmth. They exchanged pleasantries over coffee, Luca dropping names of Ivy League boards he sat on, as if to remind everyone of his pedigree. Andrew nodded along, steering the conversation to the deal. "The system stabilized," he said, projecting the latest metrics on the screen. "We're ahead of schedule." Midway through, a glitch popped up, not catastrophic, but enough to halt the demo. The room tensed. Andrew's mind flashed to that morning's session with Natalie in the penthouse kitchen, her over the sink rinsing a mug while he paced with his tablet. She'd glanced at the error log he'd shown her casually, almost as an afterthought. "It's the data handshake," she'd said simply. "Strip out the redundant checks. It's bloating the response time. Clean it up and it'll fly." Now, facing Luca's raised eyebrow, Andrew laid out her solution without naming her. "We can optimize by simplifying the protocol layers, cut the extras, focus on core efficiency." Luca leaned back, chuckling in that patronizing way, his fingers drumming the table. "Simple? Sounds like something a junior dev would pitch after too much coffee."
"Who's behind this genius idea? One of your Stanford whiz kids?"
Andrew hesitated, the words catching in his throat. He knew it worked. Natalie had proven it in their mock run earlier. But admitting it came from his housekeeper? In this room, with Luca's eyes boring in, it felt like exposing a crack in his armor. Luca embodied everything Andrew had chased, the elite circles, the unassailable resume. To credit someone without credentials would invite ridicule, questions about his judgment. Deep down, a knot twisted, part shame, part fear. Natalie was right, but saying so aloud meant challenging the very system that had elevated him. "Just a consultant from the lower team," Andrew replied smoothly, forcing a smile. "Internal talent." Luca's laugh barked out. "Lower team? Come on, Evans. We don't gamble $500 million on basement ideas. Stick to the pros. Get your MIT crew on it. Simplicity's for startups, not empires." The meeting wrapped with handshakes, but Andrew's mind churned as Luca left. Walking back to his office, he replayed the moment, the way he'd dodged the truth. It stung, this lingering pull of old prejudices. Natalie had earned her place in those sessions, her insights sharper than any degree. Yet he'd reduced her to lower team, hiding her like a secret weakness. For the first time he questioned it all, the value he placed on labels, the walls he'd built around his world. What if Luca was wrong? What if strength came from unexpected places? That afternoon back at the penthouse, the doubt lingered like a shadow. Natalie dusted nearby as he worked, oblivious to the meeting. He glanced at her, wondering if he should mention it, but the words died. Instead, he buried himself in code, pushing away the unease, but it festered. A quiet warning that the ground under him was shifting, and threats loomed not just from glitches, but from the very beliefs he clung to. That night, the penthouse felt quieter than usual, the city lights casting long shadows across the marble floors. Andrew had wrapped up a late call, his mind still buzzing from the day's tensions, the meeting with Luca lingering like a bad aftertaste. He wandered into the kitchen for a glass of water, expecting emptiness. Instead, there she was. Natalie, perched on a stool at the island, her back to him. The glow from an old cracked tablet screen lit her face, softening the usual sharpness in her eyes. She scrolled slowly, a faint smile touching her lips as images flickered by. Kids laughing, playing in a yard that looked worn but full of life. He paused in the doorway, something pulling him to watch for a moment. This wasn't the Natalie from their sessions, the one who dismantled his arguments with cool precision. Here she looked peaceful, almost vulnerable, but not in a way that begged pity. It was the kind of strength that came from carrying others, the quiet kind he'd never really known. His footsteps were soft as he approached, not wanting to startle her. She glanced up, surprise flashing across her face, and quickly dimmed the screen, sliding the tablet aside like a reflex. Andrew cleared his throat, setting his glass down. For once, he didn't bark an order or dive into code talk. "Who are they?" he asked, his voice gentler than he intended, nodding toward the device. She hesitated, fingers tracing the edge of the tablet. Part of her wanted to brush it off, keep her world separate from his polished one. But something in his tone, curious, not commanding, made her pause. "Kids from the orphanage where I grew up," she said simply. No drama in her words, just fact. "I check in on them when I can.
Send what I earn to keep things running."
He pulled out the stool across from her, sitting without invitation, drawn in despite himself. The kitchen lights were low, the air carrying a faint scent of the herbal tea she'd brewed earlier. "Orphanage," he repeated, not pushing, just letting the word hang. Inside, questions swirled. How had she ended up there? What had shaped her into this woman who fixed code like puzzles and faced him without flinching? Natalie looked at him then, really looked, as if deciding whether to share more. "Yeah, been there since I was 5. It's not a sob story, it's just life. I was on track for a degree in computer science, full ride even. But the place hit hard times, funding cuts. Someone had to step up." She shrugged, her voice steady, but her eyes held a depth, a quiet resolve that spoke of choices made without regret. "So I did. Dropped out, got jobs like this. The coding? That's from library books. Late nights online. Keeps the brain sharp." Andrew listened, the words sinking in like rain on dry ground. He'd always seen people through filters, resumes, net worth. But here was Natalie. No silver spoon, no elite network. Yet she'd built her own path, driven by something bigger than ambition. Those kids weren't a burden to her. They were her why. A warmth stirred in his chest, unfamiliar and a little unsettling. For years his life had been transactions, wins, stacked like trophies. But this, her story, touched something he'd buried deep, a loneliness he'd masked with power. She wasn't asking for sympathy, she was just being real, and it made him see her not as help or even a consultant, but as a person with a heart that beat for others. He nodded slowly, the silence between them comfortable for the first time. "That's impressive," he said, meaning it. No grand gestures, just acknowledgement. Inside, a shift happened, a crack in his walls, letting in the possibility that connection wasn't weakness.
As she picked up her tablet again, sharing one more photo of a little girl with braids grinning at the camera, Andrew felt the first thread of a real bond weave in. It wasn't fireworks or fate. It was quiet recognition. The kind that built slowly, promising more if he let it. For the first time, the penthouse didn't feel so empty. The grand ballroom of the Waldorf Astoria shimmered under crystal chandeliers, alive with the clink of champagne glasses and murmured conversations from tech moguls, investors, and industry insiders. It was the launch party for the project, a $500 million triumph that had nearly crumbled but now stood as a beacon of innovation. Andrew Evans took the stage, spotlights warming his face as he gripped the podium. At 33, he looked every bit the visionary CEO, his suit impeccable, voice steady and commanding. Pride swelled in his chest as he spoke, recounting the challenges overcome, the late nights, the breakthroughs. "This isn't just code," he said, scanning the crowd with a confident smile. "It's the future, built by the best minds in the business." Applause rippled through the room, and for a moment he felt invincible, the doubts from his sessions with Natalie fading into the background. In the wings, servers moved like shadows, trays balanced with hors d'oeuvres. Natalie was among them tonight, filling in for extra staff at Andrew's casual request, part of blending her consulting role without raising eyebrows. She wore the standard black uniform, her hair neatly pinned, staying out of the spotlight as she always did. But watching him up there, she felt a quiet spark of something new, a tentative trust in the man who'd started to see beyond surfaces. As Andrew wrapped his speech, thanking his team vaguely without specifics, Luca George rose from his front row seat. The older CEO clapped politely, his silver hair catching the light, face etched with that practiced charm. "If I may," Luca interjected smoothly, stepping toward the stage with the microphone handed to him. The room hushed, expectant. "Andrew, my friend, that was inspiring. But let's give credit where it's due. We've all heard whispers about the mystery genius who pulled this from the fire. Who is this savior? Share the name, let's toast them properly." Andrew's smile held, but a flicker of unease stirred. He'd kept Natalie's contributions under wraps, crediting them as internal fixes in reports. No need to complicate things with Luca's crowd, he told himself. "It's a team effort," he replied evenly, ready to pivot. "Our engineers—" But Luca waved him off with a theatrical grin, signaling to an assistant. The massive screen behind Andrew flickered to life, projecting a crisp image. Natalie, in her housekeeper uniform, mid-dust in the penthouse, captured from what looked like a security feed. Beside it, text scrolled. Her name, her dropout status from the computer science program, a quick bio scraped from public records. Gasps echoed through the ballroom, murmurs swelling like a wave. Luca's voice boomed, laced with mock surprise and dripping condescension. "Well, folks, meet the genius, Natalie Fraser, a former student who couldn't even finish her degree. Now she's mopping floors and apparently moonlighting as a coder. How quaint! Evans Tech's billion-dollar secret weapon, the help." Laughter tittered from pockets of the crowd, sharp and uneasy, while others shifted uncomfortably, phones already out to capture the moment. Andrew stood frozen, the podium suddenly a cage. Heat rushed to his face as the image burned into his vision, Natalie exposed, reduced to a punchline. His mind raced. How had Luca gotten this? A leak? A dig into his staff? Pride shattered into shock, the room spinning as whispers turned to open stares. This wasn't just embarrassment, it was a gut punch, his world cracking under the weight of the very prejudices he'd started to question. The applause from moments ago felt like mockery now. What would he do? Defend her? Admit everything? The silence stretched, the crowd's eyes on him, waiting for the mighty to fall. Andrew stood there on the stage, the microphone still clutched in his hand, but no words came.
The ballroom's air felt thick, pressing in on him like a vice. Inside his head, a storm raged, voices clashing. His father's old lectures on status and strength echoing against the fresh memories of Natalie's quiet insights in the kitchen. Her stories of the orphanage that had cracked open something real in him. "Defend her," a part of him screamed. "Say it. Tell them she's the one who saved this whole damn thing." But another voice, louder, rooted in years of climbing the ladder, whispered warnings. "They'll laugh. You'll look weak. A billionaire relying on the help? What about the deal? The reputation?" The screen loomed behind him, Natalie's image frozen in that humiliating pose, the text mocking her unfinished degree like it defined her. The crowd shifted, some chuckling nervously, others whispering, phones glowing as videos captured the spectacle. Luca stood smugly below, arms crossed, enjoying the show he'd orchestrated. Andrew's throat tightened, words forming and dissolving. He opened his mouth. Nothing. Just the pounding of his heart, the weight of every eye in the room pinning him down. This was the system he'd mastered, the one that valued pedigrees over people, and now it chained him silent. How could he break free, when admitting the truth meant admitting he'd been wrong all along? His gaze darted to the edge of the room, where Natalie stood amid the servers, tray still in hand. She wasn't looking at Luca, or the screen, or the murmuring guests. Her eyes locked on him, steady and piercing, not with tears or anger, but with a deep, quiet disappointment that cut sharper than any shout. In that moment, through her stare, he saw himself reflected. Not the powerful CEO, but a man trapped by his own ego, too afraid to stand for what mattered. She'd trusted him, shared pieces of her world, and here he was letting her be torn down. The silence dragged on, seconds stretching into an eternity, the room holding its breath. Natalie didn't flinch under the stares. She straightened her back, that unshakable self-respect holding her steady like it always had. No pleas, no scenes, just a subtle nod, almost imperceptible, as if accepting what she'd suspected all along. He wasn't ready to change. Not really. With deliberate calm, she set the tray down on a nearby table, the soft clink echoing in the hush. Then, without a word, she turned and walked toward the exit, her steps even, head high. The double doors swung shut behind her with a final thud, like the closing of a chapter, leaving the ballroom in stunned quiet. Andrew's world tilted. The applause that followed Luca's jab felt distant, hollow. He mumbled something vague about team efforts and stepped off the stage, legs heavy, the pride from minutes ago shattered into regret. Deep down, the daggers twisted. He'd failed her. Failed himself. That silence wasn't just a pause, it was a betrayal. One that echoed in his chest long after the party resumed its superficial chatter. The mighty had fallen. Not from Luca's trap, but from his own unwillingness to rise above it. The door has closed. In this silence, justice seems to have died. If you believe this story demands justice, like and comment with the single word, justice. Let us know you're still here. The party dragged on in a blur of forced smiles and clinking glasses, but Andrew couldn't stay. He slipped out a side door, heart pounding, the image of Natalie's retreating figure burned into his mind. The cool night air hit him like a slap as he hurried down the hall toward the staff quarters where he guessed she'd gone to grab her things. His shoes echoed on the polished floors, each step heavier with the weight of what he'd done, or hadn't done. Up there on stage, silence had been his choice, a coward's shield, and now it chased him like a shadow. He found her in a small back room, the kind with lockers and coat racks for the help. Natalie was already packing, folding her uniform into a plain duffel bag with efficient movements, her face a mask of calm that didn't reach her eyes. No tears, no fury, just that steady resolve he'd come to admire. She didn't look up as he burst in, breathless. "Natalie, wait!" he stammered, the words tumbling out ragged. "I'm sorry." I froze. Luca, he blindsided me. I should have said something, defended you. That wasn't right. She zipped the bag shut, finally meeting his gaze. Her eyes were cool, distant, like a door quietly closing. "You don't owe me an apology," she said evenly, her voice without edge, just truth. "You only owe one to yourself, for hanging on to those biases that hold you back." The words landed like quiet blows, stripping away his excuses. He stepped closer, reaching out as if to touch her arm, but she shifted away, slinging the bag over her shoulder. Inside, Andrew's chest twisted with a pain he hadn't felt before. Raw, unrelenting. This wasn't a deal gone south or a glitch to fix. This was loss, real and personal. He'd glimpsed something genuine with her, those late-night talks, her sharp mind challenging his, and he'd let it slip away because of fear. The penthouse waited for him, that gleaming tomb of success. But without her, it would echo emptier than ever. She brushed past him toward the door, pausing just long enough to add, "Take care, Andrew." No drama, no lingering glance, just finality. The door clicked shut behind her, and he was alone. The room suddenly too small, too quiet. Back at the penthouse hours later, the silence screamed. Andrew poured a drink, the amber liquid swirling in the glass, but it tasted like ash. He sank onto the couch, staring at the city lights that once felt like conquests. Now they mocked him, distant and cold. Memories flooded in. Her fixing the code that first night. Their debates turning into something like partnership. The warmth in her voice when she spoke of those kids. He'd started to change, or so he'd thought. But when it mattered, he'd clung to the old ways, the status that defined him. Regret gnawed deep, a relentless ache. For the first time, he felt the full cost of his isolation. Not just lonely nights, but the harm it caused others. Natalie hadn't deserved that humiliation, that betrayal from someone she'd begun to trust. He paced the floor, the marble cold under his feet, replaying the moment on stage. Why hadn't he spoken? The answer stared back. Pride. That brittle armor cracking now under its own weight. Slumping against the window, he let the exhaustion wash over him, the drink forgotten. This pain was new, deserved. A wake-up call in the dead of night. The empire stood, but he was crumbling, facing the ruins of what could have been. The days blurred into a haze for Andrew, the penthouse a silent prison where work emails piled up unanswered and board calls went ignored. For the first time in years, he couldn't summon the drive to dive back into code or deals. Instead, a restlessness pulled him out into the city, away from the glass towers and toward places he'd never bothered with before. It started small, a nagging urge to piece together who Natalie really was. Not as a consultant or a shadow in his home, but as a person who'd slipped through his fingers. This wasn't about control or fixing a mistake. It was a quiet quest to understand, to see the world through her eyes and maybe glimpse what he'd missed in his own. He began at the public library downtown, a sturdy brick building with worn steps and the faint smell of old paper that hit him as he pushed through the doors. It was mid-morning, sunlight filtering through high windows onto rows of shelves crammed with books. Andrew wandered the computer science section, his designer coat feeling out of place among the students and locals hunched over shared terminals. He pulled down titles she'd mentioned in passing during their sessions. Dog-eared copies of Introduction to Algorithms and Clean Code, the kinds available for free checkout. Flipping through pages marked with notes from previous readers, he imagined her here, young and determined, absorbing every line after a long day at whatever job kept the orphanage afloat. No private tutors or elite resources, just grit and library cards. Sitting at a wooden table, he traced a finger over a diagram, feeling a pang of respect mixed with regret. How many nights had she spent like this, building her skills from nothing, while he jetted between conferences? From there, he drove to the university campus she'd dropped out of, parking a block away to avoid drawing attention. The autumn leaves crunched under his feet as he stood across from the main gate, watching students stream in and out with backpacks and coffee cups. The computer science building loomed in the distance, a modern structure with glass walls reflecting the sky. He didn't go inside, didn't need to. Just being there, seeing the paths she might have walked, the lectures she could have attended, stirred something deep. She'd had a full ride, she'd said, a shot at the life he took for granted. But she'd chosen otherwise, putting those kids first. Andrew leaned against a lamppost, the cool breeze ruffling his hair, and wondered about sacrifice. The real kind, not the calculated risks of business. A group of students laughed nearby, debating some project, and he felt a twinge of envy for their unscarred ambition. What had it cost her to walk away? And why did picturing her here, full of promise, make his chest ache like this? The orphanage was last, a modest building on the outskirts of the city, surrounded by a chain-link fence and a playground with faded swings. He didn't approach the door, just parked across the street and watched from his car as kids tumbled out for recess, their shouts carrying on the wind. A few looked about the age Natalie must have been when she arrived, small, resilient, chasing a ball with carefree energy. He spotted a woman at the gate, probably a caregiver, herding them with patient calls. This was her world, the one she'd fought for, pouring her earnings and dreams into keeping it standing. No glamour, no spotlights, just everyday endurance. Andrew gripped the steering wheel, memories flashing. Her tablet photos, that soft smile in the kitchen. He'd dismissed so much, blinded by his metrics of success. Now, seeing it firsthand, the pieces fit. Her sharp mind forged in quiet struggles, her strength not from boardrooms, but from choices like these. As the sun dipped lower, he drove back, the city lights flickering on like distant stars. This journey wasn't about winning her back. It was about facing himself, stepping into her shoes to understand the person he'd hurt. Regret lingered, but so did a spark of change, a willingness to see beyond his walls. For the first time, the penthouse ahead felt less like home and more like a starting point. For what? He wasn't sure yet. Back at the penthouse that evening, Andrew shed his coat and sank into the armchair by the window, the city sprawl below a glittering reminder of all he'd chased. The drive from the orphanage had left him unsettled. Images of those kids playing etched in his mind like code he couldn't debug. He poured a coffee, black and strong, letting the steam rise as he stared into the mug. No distractions tonight. No screens, no calls. Just him in the quiet, forcing a reckoning he'd avoided for too long. He thought back to Natalie, piecing together the fragments he'd gathered that day. The library, with its free books and shared computers, wasn't just a place for her. It was a lifeline, a self-made education scraped from whatever hours she could steal. No mentors handing her opportunities on silver platters, like the ones he'd had at boarding school. And the university campus, alive with potential she'd walked away from, not out of weakness, but strength. A full scholarship, dreams of algorithms and innovation, all set aside for those kids at the orphanage. He pictured her making that choice, young, determined, calculating the cost not in dollars, but in lives. Her resilience wasn't rebellion or luck. It was rooted in responsibility, a quiet commitment to something bigger than herself. Those children weren't an excuse. They were her anchor, giving her purpose in a world that had taken so much. Andrew set the mug down, rubbing his eyes as the contrast hit him. What was his anchor? Money? Power? The empire he'd built felt hollow now, a tower of achievements stacked to impress a father who'd taught him self-reliance meant standing alone. From 12 years old, shipped off to elite schools, he'd learned to measure worth by grades, then deals, then billions. Emotions were weaknesses. Connections, liabilities. Better to control than to care. But seeing Natalie's world today cracked that facade. Her strength came from giving, from ties that bound her to others. His? It was a shell. Arrogance masking the fear of vulnerability, the loneliness that had shadowed him since childhood. Late nights in dorms, holidays alone while classmates went home. He'd buried it under success, convincing himself it made him unbreakable. A wave of clarity washed over him, bitter and sharp. He'd been wrong about her from the start, dismissing her as invisible, then using her talent without truly valuing the person behind it. That night on the balcony, her fix had been a gift, and he'd turned it into a transaction. Their sessions, though sparks of real connection, he'd let ego taint them, holding back when Luca struck. On stage, his silence wasn't just cowardice. It was betrayal of the change she'd sparked in him. He stood, pacing the room, the marble floor cold under his socks. How many people had he overlooked, judged by labels? His team reduced to resumes, relationships fleeting and superficial. Natalie's life showed him another way, success woven with heart, where helping others filled the voids power couldn't touch. Tears pricked his eyes, unexpected and hot. Not for pity, but for the waste of time, of chances. He'd hurt her, yes, but the deeper wound was to himself. Living half a life in a gilded cage, admitting it felt like shedding skin, raw but necessary. He stopped at the window, pressing a hand to the glass, the city blurring. Natalie had chosen hardship for love. He'd chosen isolation for safety. But safety was a lie, leaving him empty. For the first time, he saw the boy he'd been, scared, alone, and the man he could become. Open, connected, worthy of trust. The regret burned, but so did resolve. This wasn't the end. It was a mirror, forcing him to face the flaws and fix them. Not for her forgiveness, but for his own sake. The night stretched on, but in that quiet confrontation, something shifted. A path forward, one step at a time. The tech conference hall in San Francisco buzzed with energy. Rows of seats filled with developers, executives, and innovators under bright stage lights. Screens flanked the podium, flashing sponsor logos and session titles. Andrew Evans hadn't attended one of these in weeks, not since the fallout, but today he was here. Not to pitch or network, but to set things right. He'd spent the nights after his personal reckoning drafting this speech. Words that felt like pulling thorns from his skin. No more hiding behind titles. This was his first real step toward redemption. A public unraveling of the man he'd been. He stepped onto the stage during the keynote slot, the audience settling into expectant quiet. At 33, he still cut the figure of a powerhouse CEO, but his eyes held a new weight, shadows from sleepless reflections. The microphone hummed as he adjusted it, scanning the crowd. Many faces from that fateful launch party, including a few who'd chuckled at Luca's stunt. No turning back now. He cleared his throat, voice steady but laced with a humility that surprised even him. "Ladies and gentlemen," he began, foregoing the usual slides of graphs and projections, "I came here to talk about innovation, but instead, I need to share a story. One about a hidden genius who saved my company and challenged everything I thought I knew." Murmurs rippled through the hall, curiosity piqued. He paused, letting the moment build, his heart pounding like it hadn't since his first pitch. Her name is Natalie Fraser. She's 24, a self-taught programmer with a mind sharper than any I've encountered. She didn't graduate from an Ivy League. She learned from library books and free online courses while working jobs to support the orphanage that raised her. And yes, she was my housekeeper when our paths crossed. Gasps echoed, phones lifted to record. Andrew pressed on, his words flowing now, unscripted in parts as emotion took hold. One night, facing a critical bug that threatened a $500 million deal, she spotted the fix in minutes, something my elite team missed. She didn't ask for credit, she just did it because it was right. He leaned into the podium, voice dropping to a confessional tone. I brought her on as a consultant, and in our sessions, she didn't just debug code. She debugged me. She showed me that talent isn't a diploma or a pedigree. It's ingenuity born from real life, from resilience. But when it mattered most, at our project launch, I stayed silent. Luca George exposed her, mocked her, and I let it happen. I was a coward, tied to the same biases that value status over substance. I failed her, and in doing so, I failed the principles this industry claims to uphold. The room hung in silence, tension thick. Andrew straightened, his gaze sweeping the audience. "Natalie, if you're out there hearing this, I'm sorry. Not just for that night, but for undervaluing you from the start. You saved us, and I should have shouted it from the rooftops." A few nods appeared in the crowd, whispers turning thoughtful. He wasn't done. "This isn't just personal. Today, I'm announcing changes at Evans Tech. We're overhauling our hiring, no more credential gates. We'll scout talent from community colleges, self-taught coders, anyone with the spark, regardless of background. We'll fund scholarships for places like Natalie's orphanage, because innovation thrives on diversity, not exclusivity. The system I once worshipped, it's broken, and I'm done propping it up." Applause started slow, then built, scattered at first but growing as people stood. Not everyone, some crossed arms, skeptical, but enough to echo through the hall. Andrew felt a release, like shedding a heavy coat, the weight of his old self lifting. This wasn't a grand gesture for show. It was earned, born from those quiet days tracing her steps, facing his mirrors. As he stepped down, reporters swarmed, questions flying about Natalie, the policies. He answered honestly, no spin. Deep down, hope flickered. Not for absolution, but for a ripple, a shift in the industry and in himself. The conference continued, but for Andrew, this was the turning point. A public vow to build something better from the ashes. In the quiet hours after the conference, Andrew returned to the penthouse, the echo of applause still ringing in his ears but doing little to fill the void. The speech had been a start, a public crack in his armor, but words alone felt thin. He knew Natalie, knew her pride, her self-reliance. She'd never accept a check from him, no matter how generous. It would feel like pity, or worse, a buy-off for his mistakes. No, if he was going to make amends, it had to be deeper, something that honored her without putting her in his debt, something quiet, selfless, that touched the heart of what drove her. He started that night, laptop open on the kitchen island where they'd shared those late conversations. The city hummed below, indifferent, as he researched endowments and trusts, his fingers flying over keys not for code this time, but for a different kind of blueprint. By morning, he'd lined up calls with his lawyers, a discreet firm he'd used for mergers, now repurposed for something personal. "I need a fund set up," he told them over a secure line, voice low in the empty space. "Anonymous, ironclad. No ties back to me or Evans Tech." The meetings unfolded over the next few days, in a neutral office downtown, away from prying eyes. Andrew sat across from sharp-suited attorneys, spreadsheets spread out like battle plans. They discussed structures, perpetual funding, tax shelters, investment strategies to ensure growth. "The beneficiary is this orphanage," he explained, sliding over the address and details he'd gathered from his quiet visit. "Full support, operations, renovations, scholarships for the kids. Make it sustainable, forever. Name it something neutral, the Horizon Foundation maybe, nothing flashy." One lawyer raised an eyebrow, pen pausing. "This is substantial, Mr. Evans. We're talking millions seeded, compounding over time. You sure about the anonymity? No recognition?" Andrew nodded, a firmness in his gaze born from those reflective nights. "Positive. This isn't about me. It's about doing right by people who deserve it." Inside, memory stirred. Natalie's stories of the place. The kids' faces in those tablet photos. Her choice to drop everything for them. He'd seen the worn playground, heard the distant laughter. This fund would fix the leaky roofs she'd hinted at, buy new books, maybe even expand programs for coding classes, echoing her own path. It was a way to empower, not rescue. To give back without strings, proving his change wasn't just talk. As the paperwork piled up, he dove in deeper, reviewing investment portfolios himself. He allocated from his personal holdings, stocks, bonds, a chunk of real estate dividends, ensuring the fund's independence. No press releases, no announcements. Just quiet transfers, legal seals, and a clause for annual audits to keep it humming. One afternoon, alone in the office after signing the final docs, he leaned back, a quiet satisfaction settling in. This wasn't grandstanding like the speech, it was private. A silent apology woven into action. He imagined the orphanage director opening that first grant letter, the confusion turning to relief. No strings, just support flowing in perpetuity. Weeks passed as the fund activated, first payments wiring out under the neutral name. Andrew kept tabs discreetly, through anonymous reports, seeing the impact. New playground equipment ordered, staff hires in motion, a tech lab in planning. He didn't tell a soul, not even his closest advisors. It felt right, this hidden gesture, a bridge built in the dark. For the first time since losing her, a lightness crept in. Not full peace, but a step toward it. He'd hurt her with his silence. Now, in quiet, he was healing something bigger. The penthouse still echoed, but the emptiness held promise, a space for growth. This gift wasn't to win her back. It was to honor the woman who'd shown him what real strength looked like, and in doing so, to become a man worthy of his own respect. The ripples from Andrew's conference speech spread like wildfire through the tech world, headlines buzzing about his bold hiring shakeup and the call-out of industry biases. Evans Tech's stock dipped briefly, then surged on the wave of positive press, investors loving the inclusive innovation angle. But for Luca George, it was a gut punch. His company's reputation took a hit, clients whispering about his old-school tactics, deals stalling as partners eyed fresher options. In retaliation, Luca didn't go quiet. He unleashed a smear campaign, leaking anonymous tips to blogs and forums, twisted stories painting Andrew as unstable, his changes a desperate PR stunt, even hinting at cooked books at Evans Tech. Andrew felt the sting in board meetings, his phone lighting up with concerned texts. But he held firm, focusing on the new policies rolling out. Then, one crisp afternoon, his assistant buzzed. "A Miss Fraser to see you." No appointment. His heart skipped. Natalie, after all this time. He straightened his desk, nerves jangling as she walked in, looking composed in a simple blouse and jeans, a folder tucked under her arm. No warmth in her greeting, just a nod as she sat. This wasn't about them, it was business. "I've seen what you've done," she said evenly, sliding the folder across. The speech, the changes, and the fund. Horizon Foundation. It's helping the orphanage more than you know. New computers, staff bonuses. I traced it back to you, despite the anonymity. Andrew leaned forward, surprise mixing with quiet relief. She'd connected the dots, seen through the veil. But she waved off any response. "I'm not here for that. This is about Luca." She opened the folder, spreading documents, emails, financial logs, screenshots from whistleblower tips she'd gathered quietly over months.
After the launch, I dug deeper. Luca's not just a bully, he's dirty. Falsified benchmarks to undercut competitors, bribed reviewers for glowing reports. These prove it. Timestamps, IP traces. "I was going to go public alone, but your speech, it opened doors. Together, we can bury him." Andrew scanned the pages, his mind clicking into gear like old times, but now with her as equal. The evidence was solid, pieced from public records and anonymous sources she'd cultivated through her network of self-taught coders and orphanage alumni. A thrill ran through him. Not victory's rush, but partnership's spark. They leaned over the desk, mapping it out. He'd leverage his connections for verification. She'd handle the digital forensics, anonymizing trails to protect sources. Hours slipped by, coffee going cold, as they debated angles. Her logic sharp, his resources amplifying. No lingering glances or personal digs, just focused synergy. Like their old sessions, but charged with purpose. By evening, the plan solidified. A joint leak to key journalists, backed by ironclad proof. Luca's empire crumbled overnight, stocks tanking, investigations launching, his smug facade cracking in frantic denials. As news broke, Andrew watched from his office, Natalie beside him on a video call, her faint smile mirroring his quiet satisfaction. Justice wasn't loud, it was thorough, a team effort that leveled the field. In that moment, they weren't ex-boss and consultant, they were allies, balanced and unbreakable, the past's wounds healing in shared triumph. The industry shifted, but for them, this was the real win. Equality forged in fire. With Luca's downfall sealed, his company reeling from scandals, his influence shattered, Andrew and Natalie shared a quiet moment of closure over coffee in a downtown cafe, the city bustling outside like nothing had changed. But everything had. The partnership they'd forged in exposing him had rebuilt trust, brick by brick, turning former wounds into shared strength. Natalie had seen Andrew's evolution firsthand, not just words, but deeds. The fund sustaining her old home, the industry shifts he'd championed. Still, the air between them held unspoken questions, a tentative warmth waiting to bloom. A few days later, Andrew drove to the orphanage, the place now transformed, fresh paint on the walls, a new playground buzzing with kids' laughter. All thanks to the anonymous Horizon Foundation he'd quietly seeded. He parked outside, spotting Natalie in the yard, helping a group of children plant flowers in raised beds. She wore jeans and a simple sweater, dirt on her hands, her face lit with that genuine ease he remembered from their kitchen talks. He approached slowly, hands in his pockets, no grand entrance,
just a man stepping into her world on equal ground. She looked up, wiping her forehead with the back of her hand, surprise softening into a small smile. "Andrew, what brings you here?" He glanced at the kids, who eyed him curiously before scampering off to play. The sun filtered through leaves, casting gentle patterns on the grass, the air carrying scents of earth and fresh mulch. "I needed to see this place for real, not from across the street," he said, his voice steady but humble. "And to talk to you. Not about Luca or work, about us." Natalie straightened, brushing soil from her palms, her eyes searching his. She didn't interrupt, just waited, that quiet strength drawing him in like always. "You changed me, Natalie," he continued, stepping closer but keeping space, respecting her boundaries. "Not with demands or drama, but by being you. Smart, kind, unyielding in your values. I was blind, wrapped in ego and status, until you showed me what real worth looks like." The speech, the fund, taking down Luca, those were steps to prove I'm different now. Not perfect, but committed to growing.
I love you for who you are, and I want to be the man who stands beside you. Equals, in every way. The words hung simple and true, no poetry or pleas, just honesty forged from his journey. A breeze rustled the leaves, and, in the distance, children's giggles echoed like hope. Natalie's expression shifted, walls crumbling as she took in his sincerity, the actions that backed it. She'd watched him transform, from the arrogant CEO to this grounded partner. After a beat, she reached for his hand, her touch warm and sure. "I've seen it, Andrew. The change is real. And yes, I love you too." They stood there, hand in hand, the orphanage a symbol of new beginnings. No fairy tale rush, just two adults choosing each other, ready for a future built on trust and growth. Time passes, turning Andrew and Natalie's story from tentative steps to a shared rhythm of life. They married in a simple ceremony at the orphanage, surrounded by the kids who'd become family, vows exchanged under a canopy of blooming trees funded by the Horizon Foundation. No lavish affair, just honest promises, rings slipped on with steady hands, sealing a partnership built on equals. Natalie didn't return to Evans Tech. Instead, she founded her own venture, a social tech startup called Echo Labs, focused on affordable coding tools for underserved communities. Seed money came quietly from the Fraser Fund, a name Andrew had adjusted in secret, honoring her without fanfare. It exploded in success, her algorithms powering apps that taught kids programming through games, her face on magazine covers as a trailblazer. She ran board meetings with that same sharp logic, but now laced with warmth, mentoring young talents who'd remind her of her own path. Andrew evolved too, his leadership at Evans Tech softened by humility. He listened in meetings, championed diverse hires, and even stepped back from the spotlight to let others shine. The company thrived, but so did he. Weekends free from endless calls, replaced by quiet evenings with Natalie, debating ideas over home-cooked meals. The penthouse transformed, filled with her books and their shared photos. No longer a fortress, but a home. One sunny afternoon, they returned to the orphanage, hand in hand, laughter trailing them like sunlight. The place gleamed now, new wings added, a tech lab buzzing with young coders. Andrew knelt in the grass, helping a boy debug a simple program on a tablet, his suit jacket discarded nearby. Natalie chased a giggling girl around the swings, her CEO poise giving way to pure joy. As the kids piled on for a group hug, the couple shared a look, deep, knowing, a silent toast to the journey that brought them here. They weren't just successful, they were whole. A power couple in the truest sense, careers soaring, love grounding them, family woven from chosen bonds. As the sun dipped, painting the sky in gold, Andrew pulled Natalie close, their fingers intertwined. Life wasn't perfect, but it was theirs, rich in justice, growth, and the quiet happiness of building together. Andrew went on a long journey to realize that true worth isn't found in degrees or status, but in integrity and resilience. In your opinion, what was the most critical turning point for his change? The moment of his silence or his public confession later on? We would love to read your reflections in the comments. Please like to support stories about growth and subscribe to explore more meaningful journeys with us. Thanks for listening, and see you in the next stories. Goodbye.